Here is one of my favourite Tanaka revolvers. It's also one of my favourite real steel revolvers, especially from an aesthetic point of view. I just think they're really cool looking guns. It is the Tanaka Police Positive Special, which, as I said, is probably my favourite Tanaka revolver, as much as I love all my others. There's just something about this iconic pre-World War II kind of design. You know, it's the classic sort of detective and police revolver from the 20s and 30s, and was produced up until not too long ago. So it's probably one of the longest production runs of a revolver. Had a few different design changes, but police positive, quite a long-running revolver. Sorry. So this is a Tanaka gun. Rather than the plain ABS version or the steel finish, this is a heavyweight model, which I would always take over an ABS model. Plain ABS is not great on a revolver. It's just a little bit sort of tacky feeling and cheap. If you've seen my review of the Tanaka Smith & Wesson model 442, which is a little J-frame, that was a plain ABS model. And although I didn't make much of a fuss about it in the video, I'm not a fan of just regular ABS. If you have a choice between ABS and heavyweight, always go for a heavyweight model. I'll go into it a little bit later what the differences are. But let's just take a look at this. So the heavyweight model comes with these plain black grips, which, although I was planning on switching with wood, I think that there's a certain appeal to them. It looks very duty-like, military-like, you know, straightforward, does the job kind of thing, rather than ornate walnut grips or whatever. Look a little bit more hard-wearing. And a lot of pictures of real police positive revolvers from the 30s, 40s do indeed have hard rubber grips, which are characteristic of old Colts. Even back with the SAA, the Colt Single Action Army had the same kind of hard rubber black grips. Grips are actually interchangeable with the Tanaka Detective Special revolver. Essentially, although I wasn't really aware, I didn't used to be aware of it, but once I got this, it became quite obvious. This is quite literally the same gun with a longer barrel. So if that was removed to make it sort of a 2-inch barrel, that is a police positive. Which is also why it's got this kind of rounded butt frame. There are certain real steel examples I've seen that do have this distinctive kind of round butt grip. It kind of looks cartoonish. It's very characteristic. I quite like it. It kind of looks a little bit goofy, but it just adds to the appeal to me. And not a whole lot of detective specials, Colt Police Positive seem to have these rounded ones. A lot of them were more square, or at least less rounded. They were a little bit straighter looking. But certainly some of them were produced like this, and a lot of Colt Detective Specials, you see, do indeed have these grips, and Tanaka simply copied it straight over and switched out the barrel. What that also means, if you know much about the police... I keep on getting these confused. If you know much about the Colt Detective Special, it is a small gun. It's pretty much rival to the Smith & Wesson J-frame, which means it is a very small frame revolver. I didn't know this again until I got it, but this police positive is also very small, despite it being 100 odd years ago, 80 years ago, being adequate for a service revolver. It is indeed very small. If we do a quick comparison here, this is a Smith & Wesson K frame, which is the same size as their L frame. It's essentially the intermediate medium size frame. 357 Magnum. So this is the kind of thing you would see on the hip of a American policeman in the 70s, I guess, 60s, 70s. Be a K-frame. And this is what would have been maybe on the hip of a policeman maybe 20 years earlier. And if we have a look at the size comparison, you can see the police positive is much smaller. It really does have a really skinny little frame. Cylinder's about the same size, because 38 Special is of course the same size as 357 Magnum. Both of them carry 6 shots, which gave the Colt Detective Special and Police Positive an advantage over small Smith & Wessons, which were strictly 5 shots. So that's similar size. However, as you can see, the frame's a lot skinnier. Grips are a fair amount smaller. It's a very small gun. And that definitely surprised me when I first bought it. It is one thing that always catches me out when I buy a gun. I'm never sort of aware of how big it's going to be, and it almost always seems a little bit more dainty and small than I imagine. But certainly, with this one, it's a very small revolver. As you can see, I've got small hands, and they totally consume the grip. My finger sort of extends all the way to the end of the frame. It's almost kind of laughable that this was considered an adequate military and police service revolver, because it is very, very small. If we compare it to something like a Beretta 92, that obviously a modern day police officer might be found with, American of course, you can see how much skinnier this gun is, being a revolver. It's also not as tall, a lot thinner. It's smaller in every regard other than length, because it's got that spindly long barrel on there. But yeah, it is definitely small, so you can see. So it's strange to think that this was an adequate self-defense revolver. I say adequate. 38 Special is reasonably potent. I certainly wouldn't want to be shot by one. So out of a 4-inch barrel, I'm sure it would have been enough for most criminals, you know, for law enforcement at that time. But again, very small. Anyway, despite it being very small, it's very solid feeling, which actually being small helps with. If this was a very large revolver and didn't weigh very much, it would feel a bit hollow and light. But being very compact, even though it's not incredibly heavy, it feels very weighty. And the heavyweight material definitely helps with that, just because it gives it that extra heft, and it's almost cold to the touch. So the weight is about 520 grams. By comparison, this K-frame, which is quite a bit larger, weighs only about 50 grams more. So it's a very solid little gun. The real one would obviously be a lot more than that, because it would be steel. I think the real one's more like 800 grams or so. Probably 700, 800 grams. But yeah, this comes in at just below 530 grams. And very solid feeling for its size. So, as I've mentioned, it's made of a heavyweight material, which has a different look and feel to regular ABS. It's sort of more dusty, it's more crisp, generally. And the big difference is that heavyweight material has got zinc metal blended in with it, sort of metal dust, which gives it a dusty look. It actually makes it cold to the touch. And it's a good substitute for actual metal, which is of course important, considering Japanese manufacturers cannot use vast quantities of metal in the production of their model guns and their airsoft guns, the handguns anyway. That said, there's a decent amount of metal on this gun. All of the key components are of course metal: the trigger, the cylinder catch, which is the distinctive Colt design, rather than the Smith & Wesson design, which you push forward, which I find a little more intuitive. It makes more sense to me. Push forward and get out. You shouldn't do that. It can damage the crane. But yeah, I find that a little more a little easier to operate. That said, I have got used to this now, and you simply pull that little. Again, it's very characteristic. There's lots of characteristic Colt features on this, which include the side plate, which instead of being on the right hand of the shooter's side, like on a Smith & Wesson, so you can see the side plate there, which you remove for disassembly. On the Colt, it's the same on all the other Colt revolvers, it is on the left, with its distinctive screws, the Colt, little Colt horse thing, the stampeding Colt or something. I can't really remember exactly what it's called, but that is the sort of Colt, the old Colt trademark. And it's also got the Colt medallions on the grips, which don't show up in the sunlight very well because they're so shiny. But there, I think it's the rampant Colt. Is what that's called? So I haven't actually seen many real examples with these medallions on the grip. Most of them are plain black rubber, but I think they look nice enough. Anyway, the side plate is indeed metal. As you can see, it's got a different texture to the plastic. Not too mismatched though, so it doesn't look out of place. Pretty much this whole area is metal. The cylinder is indeed metal, like on all Tanakas, at least most of them. Hammer, trigger, cylinder release, crane, the ejector rod, cylinder kind of face, ejector, all of that is indeed metal. Although the actual frame, except for the side plate and the barrel, are indeed heavyweight plastic, which is by no means a bad thing. Much nicer than ABS. So as I've shown, the cylinder is indeed released by pulling back on the catch. Very nice and easy to do, very smooth. And unlike the Smith & Wessons that have a rather stiff cylinder kind of action, they won't really rotate much on their own because there's a spring-loaded system that keeps a certain amount of pressure on the cylinder, so it can't spin too well. This one lacks that, so it's free spinning, although I don't suggest you do it too much. You never know what you're going to sort of wear down. So it's got a nice smooth cylinder action, which is indeed metal, as I said. So it's a Tanaka Pegasus gun, which I've mentioned and explained in a few of my videos. It means that there is a metal outer cylinder and a metal inner cylinder, which you can see through here. The inner cylinder holds 6 BBs in an internal magazine. It also holds the gas, so to fill it, you have to get this to the right hole. You use the included gas adapter to put the gas in. What I actually find is that the gas adapters usually spray a lot of gas everywhere. It's not too effective. So I simply turn the cylinder retention screw a few turns to the left. You can slide the cylinder straight off the frame and just fill it independently. And considering a fill will usually last 60, 70, 80 shots, it's not too much of a pain having to take it off because it does last a good while. Anyway, silky smooth action. In comparison to my K-frame, which is a little bit stiffer and clunky, this is just buttery smooth. And something very distinctive of Colt revolvers in general is that they turn in the opposite direction to a Smith & Wesson, which is supposedly one of the reasons it's called the police positive. The whole reason behind that was one of two things. The first thing was that it had a transfer bar safety, which meant that if it was dropped and the hammer was released by something hitting it, it wouldn't actually strike the cartridge unless the trigger is definitely pulled. The firing pin won't reach the cartridge, so it was called a positive lock. The other thing, which I'm not sure if it was really a thing from Colt or whether it just sort of caught on, was that the cylinder rotates away from the opening direction, whereas a Smith & Wesson rotates into. So the Smith & Wesson rotates counterclockwise, which is the same direction it can open. Whereas the Colt, although it still opens to the left, it rotates clockwise, which supposedly makes a tighter lockup. The fact that it's pushing sort of into the frame rather than into the crane. That's another reason why it was called the Colt Police Positive. And yeah, obviously on the Airsoft one it really doesn't have any bearing, but it's just something to keep in mind. Something that I kept doing when I was shooting this is I would be firing and I'd see if I've got any shots left. I'd have a look to the left, to the right of the cylinder, just like I would on a Smith & Wesson, because on a Smith, your BB would be there and then it would be loaded. And that's how you can tell if there are any more shots left. You'd look to the right of the cylinder. So I did that, and then nothing in it, so I'd shoot, and it would fire a shot, and it's because the BBs are coming from this direction. It's just something you need to keep in mind. Okay, so the crane is indeed metal. The crane or the yoke, different companies call it different names. I believe Colt call it the crane. And underneath there is indeed an Tanaka Works and ASGK marking. Focus on that. There you go. So it's nice that they've hidden the markers, the maker's mark, sort of under there. Very smooth action, starting to slightly wear away. You might actually be able to see here how the heavyweight material actually turns silver once worn away, which is pretty impressive, being a plastic. But because it's got such a high metal content, you can actually polish these up to be silver, or at least a shiny kind of grey. You can even use bluing gel or bluing liquid to chemically blue the material once you've polished it, just because there's such a high metal content in the plastic. It'll actually react like a metal will, which I find really interesting. A lot of Japanese people do really elaborate paint jobs and everything because you can finish heavyweight material up really nicely. If you try polishing up ABS, it'll just go shiny. This actually goes silver, which it is starting to do in some sort of high wear areas, but not a whole lot. It's not the kind of thing you could scrape off. It's very tough wearing. Anyway, as I'm sure you know, it's a double action revolver. Over 100 years old, the kind of original. Something you might notice is it's hardly shooting at all. Now, something that's strange about this model, I'm not sure if it's representative of all Colt police positives coming out of Tanaka, but this one doesn't like to shoot if you've left the gun for a little bit. So if you've left it for a few hours and then you go to shoot, as you can see, the first few shots either won't fire or they're underpowered. As far as I can tell, this is just because the design is so small and the mainspring is so small that it just doesn't have a whole lot of force behind it. And if you're using a high-powered gas, I've actually got green gas in here, it doesn't have enough force to hit the valve for the first few shots, and eventually it'll break in and start shooting. But it's something to keep in mind that it's not got the strongest spring, so you may want to stick to lower powered gases and always fire a few shots off before you go loaded and use it, because otherwise you'll get out there, get ready to take a shot, and you'll just get a click. So yeah, it'll take any gas you want, but it might not reliably open the valve for the first few shots. So keep that in mind. Okay, so over on the other side, it's a little bit blank, a little bit plain. You've just got a few screws. You can also see the cylinder stop there, whereas the Smith & Wesson's a rounded little cylinder stop in the middle of the frame. As you can see, this one, you can see it go up and down there to allow the cylinder to rotate. On the Smith & Wesson, you can pull the hammer to half cock and freely turn the cylinder. That doesn't work on the Colt. It's a slightly different little design, and everything actually does just about work. Just have to get it in the right position. Everything seems kind of miniaturized in here, whereas on the Smith & Wesson you've got a big mainspring that goes throughout the grip. It's very simple in here. It's got a very small leaf spring. The mechanism only takes up this area, and it's very easy to work on if anything does go wrong. And like Tanakas, most other Tanakas that is, I'm sure it'll take real steel mainsprings, hammers, or maybe not hammers, but triggers. Tanakas take a lot of real steel parts, so if you're an American player who wants one of these and you go and break the trigger or something, it's probably going to be, well, considering it's an old gun, it might be quite hard to get one, but rather than try and find a Tanaka replacement, a lot of real steel parts will just drop in and fit here. Anyway, moving forward, you've got a very basic sight groove. It isn't sort of serrated to stop reflections. It's just very basic, milled kind of groove on the real one. And if we have a look down, as you'd expect, it's just a basic old revolver sight, which line up like that, rather than like that. The front blade does stick up a bit higher because it's quite tall. It's moulded into the front of the barrel, so it is indeed heavyweight plastic. Actually, I don't think we had a look at the hammer. The hammer is interesting because it's so thin. As you can see, it doesn't have much of a spur on it. So whereas a Smith & Wesson's aggressively textured, the Colt is very small and sort of jewel-like. That's sort of what I described the FN57's controls like. They're just very small and dainty. And it does look like it's going to snap off, but it seems strong enough. And like most older Tanakas, or at least most Tanakas that represent older hammers, it has got a firing pin mounted on it, which is cool, which is plastic and spring-loaded and sort of buries itself in the frame. So yeah, this isn't the kind of gun you want to be trying to do quick draws with, just because it hasn't got the grip on here to really do that quickly. It a couple of times I've managed to slip off while cocking it. Luckily, this is a well-designed revolver, and just like the real one, unless the trigger is pulled, it won't fire. So even if you do manage to slip, it won't fire, luckily. But yeah, keep that in mind. You have to be quite careful when manipulating this gun because it's so small. So yeah, got a exposed ejector rod rather than a sheathed design with an underlug like on this N frame, or even on this K frame. It's sort of concealed when in the gun. This is totally exposed, and it is indeed metal. Underneath it is a little screw which is used to remove the barrel. This has got to be the easiest removal. This is probably the easiest Tanaka to disassemble overall, actually. I haven't actually been able to figure out how to get the barrel off of this N frame yet. So it's really nice when, to get inside, all you have to do is undo that screw to take the barrel off on this one. So the barrel is 4 inches long, which kind of puts into perspective how sort of small the gun is. It kind of looks longer than that, but it's only 4 inches, about the same length as my finger here. And it's got lots of trademarks on, which are nice. Got police positive special. The special, of course, indicating it's a 38 special rather than a 38, an older 38, like 38 Smith & Wesson, which is a different round altogether. So yeah, 38 special. So that's nicely engraved, or at least moulded in, looks engraved. And on the other side, you've got Colt's Manufacturing Company, Hartford, Connecticut, USA. So yeah, really nice trademarks. Looks very sort of vintage. And I guess that's what really sort of attracted me to the design. It is that iconic police revolver look. If anyone watches the TV show Southland, or Southland, however you say it, which is about LAPD police, it's a good sort of drama police show. The sort of opening picture of the credits is an old 1940s or whatever policeman holding his police positive at the screen. And yeah, it's very distinctive. And you see it in a lot of cartoons and all that kind of thing. So, barrel is of course brass, and it does indeed have an adjustable hop-up. Comes with a little Allen key, which you put through that little hole above the barrel. I've got to say, despite its small size, this is the best shooting Tanaka I've owned. My Model 19 is alright, it's a little inconsistent. My N frame is very inconsistent. The hop-up is pretty terrible, to be honest. This is really stable. I've been really impressed with this. You can make some really accurate shots. And that hop-up's very decent. So simply put the Allen key in there, and it's clockwise for more hop, counterclockwise for less hop. Very easy to adjust. And yeah, good performance. So this is an unrestricted Tanaka. The valve is full size because it was made before 2006/7, I believe. So this is an older gun. I'm not sure if new ones will be restricted for lower FPS, but this is an unrestricted one. And it seems to be pushing out about 300 FPS with green gas, which for its size, again, is impressive. Other than the fact that it light strikes for the first few shots. I would actually have no issue skirmishing with this. You've got 6 shots in the internal magazine, 6 shots in the cylinder, so 12 shots. Very good performance. For anyone wanting an older style revolver that shoots well, I would definitely recommend the Police Positive. It's a really lovely little gun. And yeah, I'm sure there must be something else I've got to say. My reviews are normally a bit longer than this. But that's it. They make a few different versions of this. They make the steel finish versions, which have got that beautiful shiny finish like my K-frame, which looks great. But it only weighs 450 grams. Now, 450 grams is just sort of below that line that I just don't want to go. I mean, I'm not crazy on weight, but when it ends up half the weight of a real one, that's just, it's not going to feel great in the hand. It's the only reason why I don't buy a Tanaka Luger, to be honest. The Tanaka Luger P08, I've been wanting a steel finish one for ages, but it weighs 500 grams, and that's For a medium-sized semi-automatic, that's just incredibly lightweight. Anyway, heavyweight model, so it's acceptable. About 530 grams, feels good enough. What I really want them to make is a Jupiter finish gun, which combines heavyweight material with steel finish. I'm really hoping they'll make one of those. It'll be expensive, $400 or so, but to get the weight combined with a realistic finish, I'll instantly buy one. Just because as much as I like heavyweight material, a gun this old, obviously not the Tanaka, but the original, a gun from the 20s, 30s, 40s, wouldn't come in a plain black matte finish. It would have a lovely shiny blued finish or nickel. So it's kind of a shame that this doesn't represent that. But if you're really into that, you can always polish up the heavyweight material like the Japanese players do. Japanese collectors, you could probably polish it up nicely. Still, I got this secondhand for £110. I was very happy to pay that for it. If it was much more, I probably wouldn't. 130, 140, that's getting a little bit too much for a heavyweight because they're the more common models. You see quite a lot of heavyweight Tanakas, so there's nothing too special about them. And brand new, you can get them for about $200 from Asia. I think CRW Shop, I think they're called. They've got them for just over $200, and I totally recommend them. I know I say that for a lot of my guns, but this truly is one of my favourite revolvers. I can't see any reason other than a Jupiter finish model being produced that I would sell this. And yeah, it's great. I think I've covered most bases. Only other thing is sort of maybe the trigger. It is indeed double action, nice and crisp. Single action is very light. So it's, as you can see, very light. You get a decent sort of gas cloud from this gun as well, as you can see. Yeah, excellent little pistol. Definitely one of my favourite Tanakas, and there's going to be more videos on the way, so stay tuned if you want to see more interesting rare guns. I think this is the first video review of this gun online, like with a lot of my pistols, so subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you very much for watching.